Okay, so today I'm talking to Heather Bentley. Hi, how are you?
Hi,
Hi,
good.
thanks for joining me. That's
I'm
really
so
cool
happy to be here.
because
Me
it's
and my blurred background, because when we got on the camera, I realized that there's a whole construction project going on behind me, and there's
oh
like
look
power
at well
poles and
look at
stuff.
this.
Oh no. I was cowed by your lovely screen back there. And it's like, oh well.
Right, yeah, but that's hiding a load of old junk.
Oh well, it's I is there the pile of denial back there?
Oh yes,
That's what we have.
absolutely, totally cool. So look, traditional first question, Heather. What do you do?
What do I do? I am a string player, play the viola and the cello and also the violin, who became an improviser and then who became a composer. So I continue to, the main thing that I do is I perform live. And so everything that I make music wise kind of is an outgrowth of doing that. And I really love to collaborate with people. And these days, it's like usually I'm collaborating with maybe two or three or up to about five people making original works for the stage.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a dumb question, but when did you start? Obviously early on.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a musical family. My mom
Yeah.
was like the church of music. It was basically like music was the religion in our house. So she was playing the piano and singing, and so I just started playing the piano from really early. I mean, I just right over there, I still have the piano that I grew up sitting at and
Oh, cool.
just messing around. And then I had some lessons. And then when I got to be 7 years old, I started playing the cello.
All right.
And then that's like I played that for several years and I got really good at it. But it's a really hard instrument for a kid to carry around on their own. And my mom got really busy being a single mom. And so I switched to the viola when I was 11. And then I went through that whole world of being a classical viola player. And I was a professional violist playing in orchestras and recording sessions and soundtracks and playing chamber music. And I did that for years and years and years. Like that's how I made my living. That and a combination of teaching students. So I've been teaching actually for many decades at this point, many decades. And then when I mean, I got to be in my late 20s and I felt like there was something a little missing from the whole classical thing. So
Right.
that's when I started learning how to improvise. And so
Now
many things
that's
happened since
this is fascinating because obviously I'm a
then.
I'm a guitarist, um, and although I play classical guitar, that just was something I did as a sort of a sideline, really, and it
Mm,
still is. And the thing of improvisation is an interesting subject, I think, particularly for classical players, because to me that was just what you did. Because obviously well, you will understand this from the point of view of if you go back far enough, the music books were not available for contemporary music at all. In fact, they were just wrong, most of them. Obviously, you can get everything classical, couldn't you? But if you wanted to get something, particularly for guitar, it was just non-existent. So you just work things out of records, and because you never quite nailed the whole thing, because if you were working things out, there'd be
mhm.
something you couldn't hear or just couldn't make out what they were doing. So sort of inadvertently, you sort of started to improvise the bits that it began a bit of guesswork. But what used to fascinate me, because I work with a lot of classical musicians, is how difficult it is to improvise if you're a good reader.
Yes, that's a whole experience and adventure.
It
Hmm.
is. It
Yeah.
is. So maybe you can just sort of say something about this, because you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
it, I think
I,
this is.
I mean, so when you're heavily in the classical profession, your job is to render the composer's score
Yeah,
precisely.
yeah,
And I mean it's like I mean it's a seriously creative job. It's like being an actor, not an improvising actor, but someone who's really supposed to, let's say you're a Shakespearean actor, you really are going to say every word as it has been written, and then you're supposed to do what the director wants you to do. Okay, but you really do have that job of owning what has been written and selling it as if it were coming directly from you. So in that way, I don't diss on classical musicians,
no,
because the ones who are really good at it are understanding that that is their job and they just do it so beautifully. And so that's what I was all about. But I really I felt like something was missing. And there's actually some studies that show some researcher did an MRI study
yeah,
putting someone in the machine and they would play their Bach like from memory and it would light up a certain part of the brain. And then they put them in there with this little kind of little keyboard and they would improvise something, a totally different part of the brain lights up. And so I literally was correct that like something was missing, like half of my musical brain or whatever was not being utilized. So
yeah,
I actually went to have jazz lessons with the first violinist of a group called the Turtle Island String Quartet. He's a violinist,
yeah.
David Balakrishnan. And I went to study with him every week, like just like being a kid going off to violin lessons or something. And for the first 6 weeks that I made this big drive to go over to his house, it's not that close by, when it would be time to like play a solo, I would just feel abject terror and I just like couldn't do it. But after just keeping on going on that seventh week, I was like, well, I guess I'll just jump off the cliff. And that's how it felt to me. And then it was okay and it was fun. And um, I started playing music with this guitarist who's a really dear friend of mine to this day, Philippe Lavoie-Pierre. Hi, Philippe, if you ever listen to this. And he just helped me to be like, wow, you have so much to bring to this because look at your foundation on the viola and you can do anything you want. And so it just was like a series of just trying to be brave and put myself into situations like go to a jam, show up and play with young men who were decades younger than I am. Just try, I'd be like shaking and quaking, and it would be like, okay, maybe shaking is going to be part of what I'm doing right now. And just because if I did that in a classical setting, like shaking my bow, it would just be like, oh, well, she really is not, shouldn't be doing that. So it just became what I loved. I think somehow I wasn't exactly meant for the whole classical thing. And this is what I really love and am meant for. And so now I'll do, improvised sets that are an hour long or whatever. And just, I love the whole process of thinking like a composer for like a really long, so it's going to be, if it's going to be 35 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, it's just like, where do we want to go? Where do I want to kind of travel, or what terrain are we going to experience? And sometimes I don't have exactly a plan, but it definitely feels like, okay, we're on this journey and it's going to go do different things.
Yeah, that's
And
beautifully put. And interesting that you should say about Shakespearean actors, because I always use that analogy that, the difference between playing like sort of a classical playing as a classical musician as playing as a contemporary sort of player, like a blues or jazz guitarist or whatever.
Yeah.
Is one of them is that you're doing the play, and the other one is that you're actually having a conversation with somebody down at the market stall, and it's a very different thing, and it's
Mhm.
very interactive and all the rest of it. And it is a different, and it's like putting a different head on,
Yes.
which
Yes, it
is very
is.
similar to what you're saying about it being another part of your brain operating. Um, and it's funny because I obviously played sort of, and obviously in the UK there was a really good sort of rock scene and everything, and quite a lot of contemporary sort of stuff going on. Um, and I wasn't sort of a jazz player, but when I set up, because I got this summer school that I run called Blues Camp, and to get the idea of how to run this, I thought, well, I'll go and see a really good music summer school and be part of it, see what happens. So I booked on to one of Jamie Aebersold's summer schools.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this was 20 years ago, maybe. Um, and of course, there's loads of the guys that were there they're part of the Jazz Messengers or something or other. And that was really strange because it was literally like I had to take my, you know, rock blues contemporary head off and stick the jazz head on
Oh,
because,
yeah.
and that was a sort of strange experience. So I think, because it is, again, this is another thing which, music's a language. Different styles of music have different dialects and all the rest of it. And it takes a while, doesn't it? You're saying about how long it took you to sort of jump off the cliff
Yeah.
in a conversation. And that's like getting the confidence in a language where you could just speak, isn't it?
Mhm.
Becoming fluent.
Right. That's right. Like literally, if you were learning some other, language, I know I have never gone and lived in another country where it's, I have always lived in America. But I know from friends who have moved or friends who have come here that lived in other countries and we're not native English speakers. It's like there is this period of time where you're just straining to hear and pick up the words and you don't feel confident to say anything at all. And so, yeah, it's a little bit like that. But what's been wonderful is that I always felt welcomed. And this process, even though I started my improvising journey in California, in the Bay Area, and I now live in Seattle, this journey for me really has been um, supported by the Seattle creative music community. And it's a really unique and special and daring
Yeah,
community. And
yeah,
I can't even imagine what good luck has put me here. And, I'm just receiving invitations all the time to come and do a trio or a quartet with these very special musicians, all improvised music. We have several venues here that expressly support this very niche music, which you might call like free jazz. I mean, that's maybe kind of a way of calling it. Some people call it experimental music. I don't know. There's different, and nobody seems to be able to agree on what this kind
no,
of
no,
music is called. But and then some people actively hate like some people actively hate the term experimental music. Like, hey, what? This is an experiment. I know what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Actually, I quite like the idea of experimental, even if you think it isn't, because sometimes it's that idea that gives you the license to just do something that you haven't really, you only think about in the moment, um, where,
Yeah.
And I think that's what's the wonderful thing about working with other people
Oh, I
is,
literally, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, because you do get these moments where you work with somebody and you get an idea that you've never had before, or seemingly so. Um,
Yes.
and it's because of them,
Hmm.
not because they tell you to do something. It's just because it becomes sort of patently obvious that there's something that you could do, and it just sort of
Hmm.
comes out your fingers or whatever. You know?
Yes, I find myself sometimes playing things that I didn't even know that I could play.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
like, oh, how did that complicated thing just, come out of my
yeah,
fingers? That's weird, but there it
yeah.
is. Or sounds that I didn't know how to make on my
Well,
instrument.
this is interesting because I'll tell you a story about something that happened to me. How old was I? I was in my early 20s, and I had a friend who used to build amplifiers. Um, at one point, he used to work for When, the speaker company. Um, but this guy was running a music shop in London, well, South London, called Gig Sounds. And I got a phone call from him one Saturday morning, and he said, "Look, I've just got the new Roland guitar synth in. I think it was called the GR700 or GR707 or something. But it had this bar across the top of it. And it was the first one that actually operated sort of reasonably well as a synthesizer because the guitar is really difficult. Because every time you hit a note, it's got different overtones and all the rest of it. And it's just really difficult in the early days to get that to synthesize. So this one was, good, but ridiculously expensive. There's no way I could have afforded one. But that wasn't the point. It was like, I've got this thing in, come on up. I'll put the kettle on type of idea, and you can sit and play for as long as you want. So I went up there and I plugged in, and you get, okay, it sounds like a telephone type of thing. All the sort of things you think, yeah, okay, that's a bit odd. And then I stumbled across a muted trumpet sound. I
Hmm.
started doodling around on this thing. I thought, that's Miles Davis. That's weird. I didn't know I knew that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I then thought, let's find a saxophone. So then I started playing all this stuff. It sounded like Coltrane. It was like, my God, this is totally ridiculous because it's like there's this stuff in my head I didn't even know was there, but it needed a trigger. And because I'd never experienced a synthesizer before, it was like a complete revelation. And
Wow.
so it really made me sort of think, well, what else is in there? What else is in the
Right?
library? So, when you work with other people and you get that, like you're saying, you get the thing where it's like, oh my God, I've just played this thing. What did I just do? Type of thing. I think that's what's so fascinating about music and art, that you sort of discover these things about yourself.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. You discover those things about yourself. And also, I am perpetually fascinated and amazed by this thought that we don't really know where music comes from. It's so improbable that it's possible. And yet there it is. And I really loved your book. I love the title and everything because music is a form of magic.
It
It
is.
is magic.
It is.
And there's just no other way to really understand that it can exist. And I love that just right there in the title, it's explicit. And then, of course, I love the whole book, and it just was full of so much great practical and imaginative
Oh,
like
thanks.
activities that that were kind of fun to do and think about. But it's something that in mainstream music education, it's not so much like I almost feel as though the arts, including music and classical fine arts and all that stuff, it's sort of like, how can we still practice magic but have it be socially in the mainstream?
Yes.
And so it's kind of like a little unspoken rule that you don't link it back to.
No, don't frighten the horses, I usually say.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I know, and sometimes when you talk to people, sometimes it does stun them that you can come out with something that they haven't thought of. And in a way, it frightens some people that there's something sort of unknowable about stuff like this.
Hmm.
But you sort of go, well, actually, that's really what it's about, is the fact that it's all an illusion, really. We think we know what's going on, but we don't really. We just have a
Mm-mm.
map that seems to work. And music is exactly like that because I always say to people, music has got various templates, right? Or blueprint. You do this and this and this, and you got the blues. You do this and this, and you got reggae, right? And you do this and this, and you've got baroque. So
Yeah.
everything's got these templates, and but we always think of these templates as rules because that's how it's sort of put across that thou shalt not do this. You should not have consecutive octaves and fifths type of attitude. You know what I mean? Um, but of course, as soon as you break a rule, something new comes up. It's like a
Mm.
taboo, right? You break that, and something new happens. And in the end, it's like, and obviously with jazz and improvised music, you can play almost anything if you understand how to do it.
Mhm.
It's that sort of thing. It's like, well, how does that work? How can you play a whole load of notes that do not fit that key and they work? And that's what I try to get people to understand, that a lot of it is about internalizing sound, right? Can you hear what it is you're doing?
Yeah.
And once you've got that, lots of things fall into place. And it also means you can compose and you can do all sorts of things. You can arrange things, you can work with other people, and you just can hear where your particular instrument will fit into a sound and all the rest of it. And
Mhm.
and it's like the sort of the most obvious thing. It's like, well, it's music. Can you hear it in your head? Can you hear what's necessary now? Uh,
I love that.
you know, um, and I think obviously the problem is, like you're saying, about how it's taught, because this is one of my sort of bugbears, really, is that seems to be almost excluded from it.
Hmm. Hmm.
The sort of logical thing of, no, you need to, that's a that's a crotchet.
Yeah.
you know, you know what I mean? And it sort of loses connection with the actual sort of soul of what it is that's sort of driving a piece of music.
I have found that I have tried at various time junctures to run programs that have to do with including improvising. I used to do chamber music camps for teenagers, which was really a lot of fun. Turns out teenagers love to play string quartets if they're, already a little ways away, ways along the path of learning their violin or cello or whatever. Um, they, in my experience, have not really wanted to learn how to improvise. It's not so much until I see people like at the college level that they want to do that. If they have been already in a kind of classical education. So this is just like my lens because this is the world that I have emerged from. I almost think that it's like like child development. They want to emulate adults. And if they're going through and learning the violin, if what they see is that success looks like you learn all of this certain repertoire and you participate in these types of activities and you win these certain kinds of competitions and so forth, that's kind of what they're seeing as what success is made up of. And I also see this in like jazz education, to where younger people are really into learning standards and they're
Yeah.
really into if they are improvising, yes, but they want to improvise in that way that was
Yeah.
like really fully articulated in the 1950s and 60s. Like, here's the head, and like, here's the opportunity to play your solo, and you're gonna, first they want to transcribe solos or famous artists and like learn those solos. Then they want to just make their own, but that kind of is like that.
Yeah.
And so it's I don't really see that will to be a differentiated creative artist on an individual path emerging until more like college or older. I don't know. That's my observation just
No,
from my
I think
little
you
station.
no, you got a point, because I think what happens, this is not, well, this wasn't the case with electric guitar. Not, I don't mean jazz guitar. I mean, sort of rock blues.
Mhm.
It sort of is now, because of the advent of books with tablature in them, so that you could get some sort of accuracy to whatever somebody was playing. People then started learning note for note, with some degree of it, of it being complete, which is what I was saying before. When you were doing stuff like that yourself and working it out off a record, it wasn't totally complete because it was difficult to work certain things out. So there wasn't any wiggle room in, that became effectively the way you developed your ability to play. And the other thing I'd noticed is that the lingua franca in contemporary music was the blues. So if you got together with a bunch of people, you played a 12 bar,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that was how it worked. But now, of course, you can get a bunch of young players together, and they have to find a song that everybody knows.
Mm.
It's really strange. And
Huh.
and if you get them to play a blues, they can't actually do it properly, meaning that it's just sort of a bit formulaic, but it
Mm.
doesn't have any sort of freedom in it.
Mm.
So even I think what it is that people, and particularly young people, need to have some uh, approval from somewhere.
Yeah, I
Grades and,
agree.
you know, um, and that sort of radical element that was obviously in jazz in the early stages of jazz. I mean, it was completely radical, right? And as you say about the standards, what those early players were doing with the standards was not popular. Well, it became popular, but I mean, if you think about people like Thelonious Monk, yeah, a lot of people didn't like him.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of out there,
Yes,
and
but they
a
all were,
lot
weren't
of
they?
the
If you,
people,
originally they were all out there. Ornette
yeah,
Coleman. I
I mean,
mean,
Coltrane,
yeah,
if you listen to what he was doing a little later on, people, a lot of people didn't like it when he
no,
started getting more out there. Same with Miles Davis.
absolutely.
And so, yeah, yeah.
And that's sort of, to me, that's the essence of a lot of things to do with the arts. So that's, even beyond music and all the rest of it, is that thing of walking across ground that's different
Hmm.
and having the sort of bravery to express something in a different way. Um, and it's interesting that when, so I see this quite a bit with people that I've taught, and I see, people that become really quite good and creative, is it's not a linear process. It's more like a revelation. type of thing. It's a bit of like a road to Damascus moment where something happens. You know, somebody can come back to you a week later and they're different.
Hmm.
They've changed radically.
Yeah.
And I've seen it with people singing. You know, there's one particular guy who used to teach singing and songwriting, and he was challenged to get it to be able to sing in key. But you know, he sort of persisted and everything, and he became interested in writing songs. And then one day he came in and sat down and started singing. It was like, you know, has he been abducted by aliens? Who is this person in the room? Because it's not the person I know. And suddenly, not only was he singing in tune, but he had a voice. He'd
Mm,
found a voice in a week.
amazing. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I, going back to this idea of, you know, I've used that term magic. I mean, that's the type of thing where you go, well, it's not, you know, it's lateral. It doesn't do this incremental vertical thing.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. Yes.
Right. Um, yeah.
I literally had a road to Damascus moment, which happened in October of 2011. And had been, I was playing with a lot of orchestras and chamber music and really stressful situations because of like commuting to rehearsals and just dealing with uh, high stress performance situations. And over the previous couple of years, I'd been having this growing anxiety that just inhabited me as if I'd been like possessed by an alien. And it was really fun. Like I could see this, entity of anxiety, and I didn't know what to do to get rid of it. And so I named it Bob. And I'd just be like, Bob, please go away. Or like, Bob, not now. Not that it worked or anything like that. So this one day in October, I was driving down the freeway in my car, and it was not very busy on the freeway, thank God. And I just started like involuntarily screaming in my car, like my mouth just opened up, you know, and I felt like all this black smoke pouring out of my mouth. And
Wow.
I just screamed like that for like 2 minutes, which is pretty long time to scream, actually. And I could tell that it was like Bob departing
Wow.
from my body. And when that was over, and thankfully I hadn't gone off the road, like literally the entire world looked different. I could see, you know how people talk about like the mycelial connections of
Yep.
everything, and how
Yep.
everything is like literally I could see like it was some crazy Matrix type of film or something, the
Yep.
connection of absolutely everything. And I
Yep.
just understood my place in the world.
Yep.
And when I came home, I have this piano, which I was mentioning to you before. It's this beautiful old Steinway grand that my mom had, and now I have it. And I'm not a pianist, but I came home and I looked at this piano, and I looked at the keyboard and I said, aha, I understand you. And I just started to play it. And it was like the previous day, I couldn't play the piano. And then all of a sudden, I can play the piano. And it
Yep.
was like what you were saying about this
Yep.
singer. And also, this was kind of like the gateway event to when I started to understand myself as a creative, generative artist, all in one day. And then from then on, like, I just started composing. And a few years after that, like I had my very first publicly presented work, which was a 2 hour long opera that I wrote about the goddess Ishtar. So it was like crazy. I just like, it was going from like, I am a violist who plays in orchestras and stuff, to like, oh, I wrote an opera and here it is. And it
Wow.
was like,
That is incredible. I mean, the limits to what we put that around ourselves, right? We set the limits by pressure that's put upon us and what we think we can and can't do.
Yes.
And of course, once you remove those things, it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and things start to fall into place. I think quite a lot of people have moments in their life like this, but because they don't happen very often in a person's life, they're often just glossed over as coincidence and all the rest of it. Well, one of the things, and I've said this a number of times in the podcast, but because I talk to a lot of people and they all seem to have, or most of people will have told me of a moment like that.
Wow.
You realize that it's very common,
Hmm.
but it may not be as common in your own life because you just don't see it. But there'll be one or two events that are so outstanding and they're pivotal moments. Chance meetings. That's the one that gets me. I just happened to bump into this person I hadn't seen for so and so, and he said to me, "Oh, I was only thinking about you, just because so and so needs a whatever in his band," and then that is the big break, right? And that is so common. But because we don't see the bigger, we're not standing back to see the whole picture. We just pass it off as some sort of coincidence. But I think it's very common across the board. And of course, it's like a lot of things. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yes.
And then once you
Yes.
realize that, you can compose, you've given yourself the permission to do that. It never changes then, does it? It doesn't return to that previous state you've changed.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be great if we could get that happening earlier with people?
I think it would be great. I,
But as I say, maybe, it's something that has to take time. I mean, that is one point that, I think it does have to take time. But there's a lot of stuff that's already put in place that is problematic, I think, for a lot of people. I still think there's a lot of people who learn music and arts just generally that give up because they find it boring in the end. And I think that's very sad. And that's not, that's just because the way that it's presented, I think. Yeah.
yeah. And I also think there's like the way the arts are positioned in our society, is the idea that it's something to excel at so that people can look at you being good at it
Yeah.
is harmful
Yes.
and not, it's disregarding the fact that for tens of thousands of years, human beings have been dancing and singing and making and playing instruments
Yeah.
and creating artworks. And it's just a normal part of being a human being,
Yeah.
reaching into the imagination and expressing. I mean, that's normal human behavior. And so now to have it sort of confined to these kind of tracks, like, oh, you're gifted, so we'll put you in a special program, whether it's ballet or what, whatever. And that then you're going to get siloed because you're good at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of speaking about myself a little bit, right? Like I
Yeah.
was always good at it. And so then I took on this attitude that, oh, I'm special because I'm good at this.
Yeah.
And there are like ordinary people out there. I feel so sorry for them because they aren't, able to even experience this. Well, I guess they have to come and watch those of us who are good at it. So everything I'm saying like in air quotes, right? Because it's a really harmful attitude for people who are practitioners and who are kind of serious about sticking with it.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so that's like
Yeah.
yet another thing I needed to um, get over, having that attitude.
Yeah. Because the thing is, and I might have mentioned this in the book, I'm pretty sure I did. You know, music and art and all the rest of it, as you said, was something that you did because it created a change in in yourself and in others. It was a state changing thing.
Mm.
You see that in traditional cultures where people go into, they dance into a trance and all the rest of it. Um, and it's that idea that we're using, the arts in that way. And okay, you may have been somebody who did that within a community, but it was just a job that you were doing, a function that you had within a community, as well as
Mm-hmm.
doing a load of other things, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's tricky because we've become so sort of logical about everything, and everything has to be put in a box and be follow particular rules so that nobody gets upset or frightened or whatever it is. Everything's like that now, isn't it? When you're working in education, everything's about protecting people and stuff. And you think, yeah, well, that's great, but there's always this unexpected thing that happens where young people don't get the real opportunity to experiment, almost like that they're not allowed to do that thing so they can go away and do that thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, when I started learning, it wasn't really that I was starting to learn. It's just I got a guitar and started to play. And it was sort of like a rebellion.
Ah,
And I don't see a lot of that now. I don't see that as people doing something, this sort of, I suppose, you could say it's a sort of counterculture thing, but you don't see much of that. You don't see people doing that because it's their way of presenting themselves to the world because they just don't like doing their homework. Yeah, it might manifest like that. I don't see much of that. I did in the past, but not so much now.
yeah, I wonder about that because I wonder if it's these generational waves to where playing electric guitar when rock music was getting born was counterculture. It was a rebellion. Um, the grown-ups of the world, some of them didn't like those sounds, and so there was like, something to butt up against.
Yes.
But the grown-ups of today are all about rock music, grunge
Yeah.
music, hip hop. I mean, it's like it cracks me up. Like there's this whole thing of classic hip hop now, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yes.
it's been around all along enough now that we have classic hip hop, and
I
it's just
know.
very like mainstream. And so I think that young people are the ones who want to rebel. They are always like looking for ways to do
Yeah.
it. And maybe they're doing it online. I see a lot of really crazy TikTok videos of
Yes.
people doing crazy things. So it's just maybe shifted to some other milieu.
Yes. I think that is something that could be what's going on. I mean, because you look at certain musical trends and you go, like you were saying about hip hop, drum and bass was another sort of thing, and grime and stuff like that. But it doesn't take very long now before these things become established as to
Mhm.
be okay. this is all right. Um, and you're not, it's very difficult to be, it's difficult to be subversive as well now. Well, now that's not strictly true, but I think young people find it difficult to protest something because everything's so scattered. We were
Hmm.
talking about websites before we
Yeah.
started, which we
Yeah.
must come on to because it was such a good point. But because of social media, there's not one fountain of information. And I think that confuses people. It's difficult to work out what it is that you can sort of go, yeah, I agree with that on, this is the mainstream. I think it's quite difficult now. And there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of noise, it's difficult to pick up the signal. You see what I mean?
Hmm. I do, but I also have prognostication or intuition or something, premonition. It's a future thing. Well, obviously, all those words are about the future, that we are going to be seeing the mother of all social uprisings coming around in a couple of years.
Right.
And like you, I think it's the same thing in the UK as it is over here in the US. Like, there's this generation of young adults who have this knowledge that they will never be able to own a house. They probably won't be able to afford to have children. Um, that we have rising authoritarianism here, on both sides, Republicans and
Mm.
Democrats.
Mm.
Politically, it's very obvious that the government works for corporate interests on both sides. And um, I think we're just beginning to see like an enormous societal protest. Is only the beginning. That's what I think. That's my prediction. And so I think along with it is there has to be noise, right? You got to make noise. So I'm kind of interested in street noise. And like I am not a street noise person because like I go out and I yell for like 1 second and I lose my voice. So I know I'm not like a street protest kind of person. I get sunburned and it's just like I'm not cut out for it. I'll get sick. But anyway, I look at street noise and chants and huge gatherings and I'm like, oh, people are finding there's muscle in sound.
Yes.
And I think it's
And
real
that's
interesting.
very visceral, isn't it? It's very sort of primordial type of thing with that. It's the sort of thing that if you go back to, I don't know, African music or something like that, where you got a lot of chanting and stuff, or even early church stuff where you've got chants. There is this sort of, in a sort of using the sort of psychological thing, you can feel something changing
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I mean, we've got we've got a lot of problems over here. I mean, there is a sort of people having a lot of problems feeding themselves and stuff like that, which is ridiculous how we've got to this point.
No,
Um,
ridiculous.
and how on earth we've got the sort of, I mean, if there's anything for looking at sort of political, you know, how can we put this, career politicians and thinking, well, that didn't work. You know, it's what we've
Yeah.
ended up with over here.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had an experience one time. I went to this is just kind of pivoting a little bit, but talking about like groups of people. I went to Cuba actually twice, which is kind of a little unusual for us in the US because you have to get special permits to go there and things. But in this one street in Havana, that they have a thing over there which is called the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, or the CDR. And it's just basically a neighborhood association. They call it this political thing, but it's just kind of like a neighborhood group. And so in this one street in Havana, the CDR, and there's always someone who kind of heads it up and sets the tone for what's going to be going. And so this street was headed up by this wonderful artist who was a muralist. And so the street was kind of narrow, and it had these tall apartments on either side. So maybe like 7 stories high or something. That the people in that neighborhood had completely covered both sides of the street, the buildings, all the way up with these incredible murals, like so colorful, so amazing. And then every Sunday morning, they had a Roomba that took place. So the Roomba is a real old musical form that's African in its origin. I guess probably changed since, these people have been living in Cuba, but um, they would have their like house band, and they would set up in a certain place in the street and start playing, and then people would gather and they would be like dancing. But there's so many people that you're packed in like sardines. And it was the only time that I've ever experienced in my life, like just being moved as part of like a
Yeah.
larger body, and just kind of like singing things that I didn't know how to sing and dancing things I didn't know, but just like this kind of dissolving of the ego or dissolving of individuality, which was scary for like some long moments of like, wait, I'm just this white girl from Seattle. I don't belong here. And then after a while, it was like, well, I'm here, and here we are. And actually, this is
Yeah.
amazing and powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a real moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. That's the sort of thing I mean about that. The sort of the okay, call it roots for want of a better word. That sort of feeling that um, music when you sort of peel it back to things. I mean, I've always thought that things like samba rhythms and the clave patterns that you get, everybody's following the guy with the two sticks. I've always thought it was really great that you got all these incredible players and there's this guy with a couple of sticks and everybody's following.
Yeah.
It's like the most innocuous instrument and everybody's paying attention to that. And I like that sort of thing of when you listen to um, musical styles, and there's something simplistic but incredibly potent about it. Um, I This is true with reggae actually, because I played reggae for many years,
Oh, cool. Oh, that's
and
fantastic.
it took and reggae's a funny one because being a white guy playing reggae, you had to learn how to syncopate, if you see what I mean. Whereas, it didn't sort of come naturally at first, but when you sort of get it, and it all sort of opens up, and you realise it's all about what you don't play, you know,
Mm,
what you leave out, and it sort of infuses the sort of rhythm of reggae. It's also difficult to put your finger on. It's sort of yeah, it's that sort of internal narrative of a piece of music, particularly with reggae and other Latin styles, and this is not just confined to you know black music. It's true. I would say this is true in things like Mongolian music and everything. There's something that sits in the sound that informs you,
mm,
and it can be almost completely empty.
mm.
It's very strange.
Wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. Anyway, interesting, interesting point. So I've never been to Cuba actually. I'd love to go. Actually.
You should go.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just music everywhere. It's truly valued.
Yeah.
And then also people participate in it. It's like their music.
Yeah. That's right.
It's kind
There's a
of,
sort of there's a sort of a social aspect to lots of things that you hear about in Cuba, whether it's the music or the fact that, that they're into sport in such a way. I mean, look at the number of great Cuban boxers there are, or the great Cuban ballet dancers and stuff like that. It's amazing. It's such a
Mhm.
small place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I have been there twice and it's really incredible. And after spending some time there, little bit of time, I feel more confused about Cuba than I did prior because it's a mixed bag, you know?
No,
Yeah. I'm not an expert on Cuba, but also I think that you should go there sometime because it's
yeah,
an
well,
amazing
I
place.
will. It is a place I
Yeah.
should. It's on my list.
Good.
It's on my list.
That's good.
So we must talk um, websites.
Oh, yes, website. Right.
We must do this
Um,
because this is one of the things when you said something which I thought was like, it's exactly what I think about websites. So you were saying that you hadn't put, well, you have now, but there's lots of things you hadn't put on your website, music and
yeah, I mean, I have been creating music and some of it exists either as a video or as audio. Um, and I just needed to put it on my website. So right before we got together, it was a good incentive, like, oh, I better put those couple of things on my website. But what I was saying is that maybe 20 years ago or something, as the internet was kind of shaping itself up, to maybe about 10 years ago, seemed really important to have a website. And that was going to be a sign that you were serious at what you're doing. And anymore, I treat it like my big online filing cabinet for
yes.
the public. So, or like if there's somebody who wants to work with me and they need a photo, or like they're thinking about maybe do they want to reach out to me, they could go there and they could listen or watch something that I've been doing and then they could reach out to me. But honestly, that almost never happens. Everything collaboration wise that I do is relationships that I have built
Yeah.
in real life here in Seattle or with people who I know who are friends of people in Seattle who live elsewhere. Like maybe they live in Los Angeles or maybe they live in Chicago or maybe they live in New York, but like we're kind of connected here in the United States. And so then it's like, hey, maybe you could come to Seattle and we'll do this thing together. Or, hey, maybe I'll go to LA and we'll do this thing. So this is like has happened, but the website doesn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And yet it's a place for me to make an archive basically. And yeah, I don't know. A friend of mine made my website. I didn't pay very much money for it. I still have to pay every year for the hosting. So every time I see that charge, I'm like, oh, well, I'm still paying that. Oh, whatever. Okay, so I'll pay it. It's not that much, but yeah.
I totally agree. When websites first sort of arrived, that it became obvious that you could have one. I had a really great one. Some guy set this up, and it looks amazing. And as you said, if you had a website, people went, "Oh my God, you've got a website." It's like
You must be
you've
real.
arrived, right? And then I went through this thing of when you started to get all this stuff about being able to work out who was visiting your website and all this sort of thing. So sort of, was it SEO or whatever? I don't know. Anyway,
Oh, right.
yeah, and all
SEO.
that sort of stuff, right? And and then I sort of thought, well, what's the point if somebody in Bahrain has visited the what? That's got nothing to do with anything. And very early on, so really when the website things really started kicking off, read, I must have read a book. Yeah, it was a book I read by Seth Godin. So he's been on the scene for years, and he used to work
Yeah,
for Yahoo, right?
I read his books. Very inspiring at the time. Yes.
Exactly. So, and he said that he was the guy who come up with this idea of opt-in email. This is when people were starting to spam everybody, right? And he said, this is not a good idea. You need to have it so that people opt in to your email. And he said, because what's going to happen is that eventually it will return to what it was like pre-industrial revolution, which is you lived in a village, you needed your grain to be milled or whatever, and you went to see the miller, and you had a chat. You chatted about the dog, the cat, the family, and all the rest of it. You did the stuff, paid him your money, and off you went. And he said that's where you'd go, unless you fell out with him, and you'd go somewhere else. It was all about relationships. That was his point. And he said, so this idea that you just sort of just go somewhere and just buy something from somebody you don't know, he said that won't last for very long. And of course, really, that is true because you end up with certain places that you go. You don't just shop around all the time. And so the point about the website, yeah, it's like a shop window, isn't it? It's like saying, well, yeah, okay. Like you say, this picture of me, whatever. And, this is where you can get in contact with me. And that really, I think, is it. And I'm still, as I said to you, I still know people that are spending unbelievable amounts of money on websites, and it seems to be like because they run a business, they think, well, that's what gives them the thing. But it isn't. It's about so and so recommending. It's referrals. It's connections. It's knowing this person and all this. It's getting out there and meeting people. And the people that I know are really successful, that's all they do, is they just go out and meet people.
Yep.
Networking. But it's just making friends, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So,
Yes.
and I think we could look at that and think, well, that is something that we can see, somewhere along the line, somebody's going to look at that and go, yeah, come on, this is just nonsense, really. What is it? It's about meeting people and, making people, sorting people's problems out. Because really, that's all you're doing, isn't it? When you run a business or whatever, you're doing something that offers something to a community, and even I would say even this sort of commoditizing of music. I know this is another rabbit hole, right? But I mean that is only a recent thing. It's a little blip in time that you can sort of go, oh, you can buy this thing of this person's. I mean that's such a small period of time that's been possible, and even now, to try and make a living out of selling CDs or whatever it is, or downloads or whatever, it's not going to happen, is it, anymore?
And yet, my group, which is called Kin of the Moon, we just launched a record label, which is called Strange Moon Records, like
Right,
a couple of weeks ago.
right,
And we are all fully aware that the records aren't going to make money. Like,
no,
even if people buy them on Bandcamp,
yeah,
they're not going to make enough money to pay for themselves, but you have to we like wrestle with exactly what you were just saying, like, oh, buying something of someone. But the thing is that um, for the music to be preserved, like as a thing that
yes,
some certain human beings, like at a certain time, like created, and and then here it
yes,
is. like the Lascaux caves or something. There it is. It's like, what's
Yes.
the value of it? The value of it, who knows what the value of it, but there it is, and it's wonderful. And so, we've
So
been,
there's a what happens with things like that CD, because I use CDs, right? And vinyl. But there's something interesting about it, because if you that sort of thing of transferring, so if somebody buys it, or you give that, or you gift it, or whatever it is, right? And it's not just this download thing, right? It's a physical thing.
mm,
That is very powerful.
mm,
And I I don't know if I put this in the book actually, but I produced a single with a band back in the 1980s, sort of early 80s. And so it was an independent single. And we, I don't know, however many we had run off, 1,000 or 500 or whatever. And we're selling them at gigs. And the studio said, well, look, if you give us an extra 50 quid or whatever it was, and we'll take some of these and just send them around some radio stations. And we just, all right, okay. Didn't think much of it. And we didn't realize, but we started picking up airplay around the UK and on the continent. And, 'cause people said, well, I heard you in a shop. And I thought, no, it wasn't. Something must have been something that sounded like that. And eventually somebody went, no, it was you. I said, what shop was it? It was in Halfords, which is like a buy parts for a car type shop, right?
mm.
So I thought, this is weird. But the BBC picked up on it. So it's just local BBC. I came out with the BBC mobile and recorded us. And they paid us MU rates, right? And this is, I always think this is incredible. It was virtually to the pound what it cost us to record and press the single.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's amazing.
we could have taken these and given them away, and we would have got our money back. And I've never forgotten that. It was such a profound thing that we get fixated on having to sell the things in the conventional route.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we miss that opportunity that actually there's something else going on. But
Mm.
that could be your calling card. The very fact you've got a record label is your calling card, It
Huh?
generates things that you could end up as being so much revenue that you could never have got by selling the actual physical object. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
I
we have
I
to be open to
remain
that.
open to that possibility. That's very
That's it.
cool.
You've got to be
Yeah.
open to that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is what I think is so important, and this is, what I've been trying to sort of get at with the book, that we have to think bigger and broader about stuff. And I think this is really part of what
Mm.
you know. You talk about improvised music. I mean, that, because you don't know what's going to happen, do you?
Correct. Correct.
Really do not know what's going to happen. And you know, and it's because I certainly did some improvised stuff, where nobody knew what was happening until somebody started playing and you're off. Um, and it's time. The thing that struck me about it is it's a timeless event. Time disappears in some
Mm.
weird way.
Yeah.
It's very odd, very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it does. It's the whole time mindset while being on stage improvising. It's like a vortex of the now.
Mm,
Um, and kind of earlier on when I was getting more trying to get comfortable with transitioning into this, I would say this thing to myself, just stay with it, stay with it, stay with it. So whatever it was that was going on, like
mm,
my mind would try to go forward sometimes and be like, okay, where is this going?
Mm,
Or maybe, oh, that thing just happened. And so just kind of having this little mantra, just stay with it, was something that was helpful to just concentrating my presence in what was actually happening.
mm.
Very reality based. Um, and I believe that magic is a reality, right? It's a form of reality. And so giving oneself over to the reality of time in the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little countercultural too, because we're all
Yes, it
supposed
is.
to be planning for our futures and writing memoirs and stuff like that,
Mm,
but just all that matters is this right now.
yeah. Yeah, that is utterly what it is, really, isn't it? I mean, when you're playing, because you lose yourself in the playing, and of course, you're saying about people being wired up and you know, brain scanned and whatever, and
Yeah.
different parts of the brain operating. But of course, when you realise that everybody's sync up uh, when you're playing music, you think that's just such a strange thing. Again, similar to what you're talking about being in Cuba and the music, everybody is in that zone. You see what I mean? That vibe of what it is. And I think that's something we need to, we've got to be aware that those states of mind are really what make us human, really.
Hmm.
Collectively, as
Yes.
as social creatures.
Mhm.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool stuff. So tell me, just because you didn't say about what you've been doing recently, so give yourself a plug. Come on.
What I've been doing recently, I have some groups that I've been working with. They're really cool. I have a brand new group called Hedge Witch. That is me playing cello and my good friend Leanna Keith playing flutes. And then this amazing movement artist called Crow, who is part of a group here in Seattle called the Degenerate Art Ensemble. And so anyway, the three of us have been kind of meeting together for since last year to just kind of explore what it means to improvise in a combination of movement and sound. And the
Right.
cool thing is that Leanna with her flute has a lot of experience like in taiko and martial arts and some other kinds of movement things. And so she's been kind of like dancing with her flute with Crow. And then Crow also has been singing and playing little percussion instruments. And so it's kind of like, what does it mean when people combine these
Yeah.
things? So me playing the cello, it's not like I can get up and walk around that much, but I also have been playing piano. So we had a show on Saturday, which is the first time we've ever done anything in public, and it was just so cool and so much fun. So I hope we do more.
Yeah.
And then I have I have a buddy here in Seattle who's a real veteran of the creative music scene. His name is Don Berman, and he plays drums. And his father was a violist, like I am also a violist, and he played in a string quartet. And so Don wanted to have this kind of modern take on a string quartet. So he asked me and two amazing improvising electric guitarists to form a string quartet. So it's
Wow.
like drums, percussion, two electric guitars, and then electric cello, because I plug in the cello and use effects for this. So we came out with we came out with a CD this year, and our group is called Threshold. And the CD is also called Threshold and is available on Bandcamp.
Right.
So that's really cool. And then, like I said, my group, Kin of the Moon, founded this. We started a record label, Strange Moon Records, and we have several more releases coming out this year. We just released one on March 15th, amazing album called Lookout, which features our friend and colleague Kaylee Lane Eaton with a big long song cycle. So amazing with all these improvising musicians from our community playing on a bunch of the tracks. And this summer, I will be recording 3 pieces of chamber music that I have composed since 2020 that are more like straight ahead chamber music pieces. They all involve piano. There's one that's piano, violin, clarinet, and cello that's called Pixie, which is an homage to Pamela Coleman Smith.
Yeah.
And there's many things about that that are really
Yeah.
cool. And then there's a piano quintet, which is piano plus string quartet that I wrote last year. That was an homage to this woman who designed the Sarah P. Duke Gardens at Duke University, because that's where the commission was from. And she was a landscape architect in the 1920s and 1930s. And so it was very groundbreaking American woman in a traditionally male field, which said that it was a good thing she got involved because all the men were just doing cemetery plantings. So that was kind of a funny thing she said. And then the third piece on that album is called Cathonica. And it's a friend of ours who played the flute here in Seattle and was a really important member of the contemporary music scene. He died a little ways into the pandemic. And so this is a memorial piece for Paul Taub. And if Leanna, my flute playing friend, is a flutist in there, and then it's myself playing viola, and then Kaylee, my other colleague from Kin of the Moon, playing piano. And it features piccolo and C flute and bass flute because Paul Taub was a big proponent of just playing all of the different flutes and got so much music commissioned from really interesting composers. So we're all very sad still that he's not walking the earth with us. So that's the big project I have coming up. So that was a question, but lots of things going on.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was going to say, what do you do when you have some spare time?
Yeah, I actually do have. I've tried to structure my life so I'm not in the rat race anymore, which is nice. I
It
I
sounds
live
like
in
you really enjoy what you do.
oh yeah. I actually only do things that I like anymore.
Yeah, this is good,
So,
isn't it?
so that's really, that's good. Takes a while to sort that out.
Yeah,
But
it
I live
does.
in a multi-generational household with my husband and my son and daughter-in-law and their baby, and we have 2 cats, and we're about to get chickens and
Oh wow.
growing things in the yard and stuff. So, it's just there's stuff going on.
Yeah, it's good. Oh, that's the thing, isn't it? It's about just living
Yeah.
instead of working.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah. And
course.
I teach. I teach 5th graders
Mm.
orchestra. So that's just like this one class. And then I also teach um, at Cornish College of the Arts, but I only have one student there right now, a violin student. But I think that next fall I'm going to be teaching a composition class over there, just one class. Yeah, so it's nice. I'm not
Yeah,
heavily employed. It leaves me time
yeah,
to do these things.
yes. Yeah, you got to have that. You got to have time. You could because you don't get any ideas without doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
You
Exactly.
have to just be able to sit and not be thinking about anything, and then you get an amazing idea. It's true, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's
totally.
brilliant. Right then, Heather. Well, that was wonderful. That
Thank
was
you. It
wonderful.
was wonderful to be able to have a chat with you, Vic. You and I have kind of been aware of each other for a long
Yeah,
time. This is great
but of course,
to.
it's always difficult to match times up. Let's face it.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm over here on the left edge. It's 8 hours difference from you, or 9, and then 9 hours from Europe. So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is difficult. But that was lovely. So don't disappear when we say goodbye because it just sounds like I've done an amazing bit of editing.
Okay, cool.
So thanks a lot. It's really cool.
Okay, thank you, Vic. I appreciate it. Great to talk to you.